Hello, welcome to this session titled Technology and Creative Processes in a Changing Environment inside the track Natures and Words. This session includes 5 papers. First, Kerich will present Perlin Noise and Sovereign Land, Minecraft World Generation Algorithms and Colonialism, which explores procedural generation technologies. The second paper, presented by Rewa, Wright, and Simon Howden, is titled Extensions of Reality, Plants and the Technological Virtual, which explores a selection of virtual and extended reality artwork through the theoretical lens of posthumanism. Then you have Andrea Wollensak and Brett Terry presenting their paper Environmental Critical Zones, Reading the Wrack Lines. This is a project designed to engage the local community with innovative learning approaches focused on environmental change. Then you have Paloma Gonzalez presenting Media Art and Face Recognition, Critical Lines of Work, that explores how artists are critically approaching the lack of ethics of these mechanisms of classification and control. And finally, we have Erik Nardini Medina presenting When the Others Are the Machines, the challenge of relating to the new craftsman, which proposes to reflect on artistic creativity in the artificial dimension. So thank you to the authors. Thank you for coming to this session. Let's now enjoy the presentations.
Hello and welcome to my short paper presentation, Perlin Noise in Sovereign Land, Minecraft and Colonialism. My name is Kerich and I'm a 5th year PhD candidate at the University of California, Santa Cruz. The paper that I'll be presenting on today is focused on the record-shatteringly popular video game Minecraft and its relationship to colonialism and coloniality, specifically in terms of its world generation algorithm. You might be asking, why look at world generation? What even is world generation? And to answer these kind of foundational questions, we first need to talk about digital worlds and games more broadly. In the early days of video games, the way worlds tended to be created, though this isn't true 100% of the time, was very authorial. Every pixel of Pac-Man's maze was designed and set by an artist in the exact position that we play it on. In games like Myst from 1993, each pillar and building was 3D modeled, textured, and placed in the world specifically in that position by an artist. And computer, of course, is going to model how a player engages in the world and moves around it, but the way the worlds themselves were created is almost painterly, each element being designed and placed just so to create a space the players would later inhabit. This was partially possible because games of the era had very definitive sizes and scopes, they were smaller than the sizes and scopes of games today, and as such it was manageable to have them be completely authorial. As games' sizes and complexities have grown, it has become more and more difficult to create game worlds in this same way, and it has become very obviously economical to not rely on a huge team of artists to create a massive world, but instead to use the computer to create the world for them, using what's called procedural generation, to algorithmically build a world. Minecraft is a game which relies heavily on procedural generation to build its worlds, the specifics of which we'll talk about in later slides. Now, however, I want to raise an important question for analysis. With painters and other kinds of artists, it's fairly easy to draw direct lines between them and their artwork and to hold them accountable for what kind of artwork they produce. When a computer, on the other hand, is procedurally creating the art, the direct line of accountability becomes twisted and difficult to follow. Part of the work of this project in particular is to find ways to entangle this line so that we can both evaluate procedural generation and hold those who use it accountable for its behavior, for its results. I've talked a lot about Minecraft up until this point without identifying it in a broader way, so I'm going to do that now. Minecraft is a 2011 game created by Mojang, a Swedish studio that was eventually acquired by Microsoft in 2014. Minecraft is hugely popular, having over 238 million copies sold, making it the best-selling video game of all time. At its core, Minecraft is an open-world exploration game where you mine resources and build structures to live and work in. As mentioned before, it uses procedural generation techniques to create this terrain and this world. Due to its wild popularity, Minecraft is a very well-studied game, and especially so as it relates to colonialism. Scholars like Daniel Dugan and Sabine Herrera have critiqued its reliance on extractivist models of consumption and neoliberal utopia. This extractivist mindset hasn't been lost on fans either, who make many mods such as the one pictured on the right, Immersive Engineering, which add more and more industrial components to the game, creating even more methods which to replicate the extractive industries that have ravaged the world, especially in formerly or currently colonized countries. They've even, in this mod in particular, replicated oil derricks, which is shocking to me to recreate. Scholars of Minecraft have largely focused on the design elements of the game to formulate their critiques, and have a very small corresponding emphasis on underlying code systems. My project in this paper is to shift this focus to these underlying code systems and provide a new form of analysis at the kind of code and system level. As a first step to doing this, we're going to first need to talk about the fundamental basis of all terrain generation in Minecraft, the seed. Procedural generation often relies on a lot of randomness to do its generation. It helps makes it exciting and unpredictable as to what kind of worlds will be created because they're partially random. Minecraft is no exception to this, and the procedural generation it uses a random noise function that I'll talk about more later to create the various hills, valleys, mountains, and oceans, and also to distribute resources in the world. Sometimes, though, it's helpful for randomness to be not so random. Sometimes you'll want to debug a broken world, or maybe just test out a new change to the world generation algorithm. To achieve this, you'll use instead what's called a seeded random number generator. It essentially takes in a string of letters and numbers and then uses that to create as a basis to create its random numbers. Given a particular seed, a random number generator will always produce the same results. As you can see by these screenshots of various YouTube videos, it also gives players a way to share worlds that they like or find interesting by providing that world seed information. Someone else who takes that seed information can recreate these worlds exactly. These are some examples of seeds, kind of what they look like. The seeds, in effect, begin to function as pseudo-names for these worlds. Names which are interpretable by humans, and that they're Arabic numerables in the Latin alphabet. They're kind of parsable and understandable as information. And they're also interpretable by the computer as information for it to use to generate random numbers. These seeds provide control and, in effect, ownership over the worlds they create. As Sabine Herrera writes in her talk Plantations of Play, naming is an act of control, and this is especially true with seeds. A player can't own that mountain over there or this ocean, but they can own a seed, and that's a name with the power to determine the entire formation of the world. Something that Minecraft seeds very visibly influence in the game is the Perlin Noise function, which determines the shape of the world. So let's turn our attention to that function next. Perlin Noise, invented by Ken Perlin in 1983, is a way of generating random noise in a space and is used in many computer graphics applications, especially in terrain generation. It works by breaking apart the space that you're generating the terrain in into an evenly spaced grid, and then assigning random vectors to each point on that grid. By interpolating between those vectors, the result is a smooth-looking random terrain. Perlin Noise's big innovation was this kind of smoothness. Prior noise functions often had jagged or irregular slopes that immediately read as artificial, but Perlin Noise, on the other hand, produces smooth, naturalistic space. The world generation of Minecraft works in stages. First, the Perlin Noise function is run and the raw terrain is generated and then represented entirely by the stone block. This world is completely lifeless and kind of exists purely as a visual representation of form. So let's take a look at what that looks like. On this slide, you can see a screenshot of the terrain of a Minecraft world after the Perlin Noise terrain generation has been run, but before anything else occurs. Functionally, what I've done here is arrested the terrain generation process after this step. Very notably, the world's shape pre-exists any inhabitants or resources of the world. The rest of the world always follows from this initial form. After this step, there were a few more passes over the world until it looks something more like this. The general blocks and structures of the world are determined by the biome, which is partially assigned to this area based on the results of the terrain generation. As I said before, the world always follows from the form. On top of and related to the biome, various other things are added called features. There are various terrain features like the lava pool that I've circled in this screenshot, and then also structure features like the village I've circled. Very importantly, as a part of terrain generation, entities do not spawn. Entities are one of a number of creatures, friendly or not, that exist in the world of Minecraft. However, their existence in the world is subject to the terrain and never the other way around. The only real force that can enact change on the terrain is the player themselves. While the world is richly populated by resources, all these entities, which only come into being as the player moves through the world in the first place, while the world is richly populated, only the player consumes them. No entities consume them. There are some exceptions to this, but by and large, the entities do not desire or consume resources in the world. In this short presentation, and unfortunately it's much shorter than I would like to have, I've covered a few different ways that Minecraft's coloniality manifests, and I wanted to recap them here as I wrap up. First, we looked at how seeds create the ability to name and possess the world in its fundamental formation. We've seen how the world is filled with kind of infinite resources and then populated by beings that do not need or desire them for the most part, thus leaving the player encouraged to extract them without worrying about harming the world because there's infinite things to take and nobody cares if you take them anyway. This raises these ideas raise the question, of course, how could this be different? It's kind of outside the scope of the presentation and my very limited time here to get into it in detail, but I wanted to present some thinking that has been done on the issue. In their paper Towards Sovereign Games, Elizabeth Lopense, Witilati, and Maze Longboat present the notion of sovereign games, games which advocate for the self-determination of indigenous peoples and have indigenous people in lead development roles, as one way of kind of decolonizing games. Their paper looks at 3 different games, When Rivers Were Trails, Lost Memories, and Terra Nova, as 3 examples of games which fulfill this notion of sovereign games. Minecraft, on the other hand, can never be a sovereign game developed by a Swedish studio by non-indigenous people, and especially I don't think it can be now, as it has been absorbed into kind of the monolithic corporation Microsoft, which has even less of commitments to trying to make games in this manner. More broadly, however, than sovereign games, I think we fundamentally have to ask a very fundamental question, which is what do we put forward, what do we put first when we make any game system, not just terrain generation, and how do we assure that our tools are in line with our values? Do we generate worlds with histories and then conform those worlds to those histories? Should worlds have pre-existing inhabitants that don't just spawn when the player exists there? And should they be intimately connected in a kind of material way to the worlds where they live? Can worlds be separated from any ability to be controlled, as with the seed, at all? Some of the foundational steps to decolonize games will necessarily stem from answering these questions and building tools that honor those answers. Thank you very much for your time and for watching this video.
I'm Rewa Wright. I'm a co-author with Simon Howden of the paper Extensions of Reality and the Technological Virtual. Today we're going to be having a wide-ranging conversation about plants, data, and people. We'll be touching on Indigenous identity, data colonialism, plant co-composition, and how we might gesture towards some form of post-humanist thinking in our art-making practice. But first, I'd like to pay my respects to the First Nation elders of Meanjin, on whose lands I record this video from today, lands which were never ceded and are still subject to the ongoing process of colonialisation in the nation state of Australia. So I pay my respects to the Gubbi Cubbi, Yagara, Jagera, Turrbal peoples of the Meanjin area In Western cosmology, Christian cosmology, plants were right there at the beginning in the Garden of Eden. But in true humanist style, it was Adam and Eve who got to write that narrative. And Adam became the main protagonist while Eve was the deceitful sinner, drawn into sin by an animal, the snake, and by eating a plant, the apple. So from this fall, sort of understanding of plants and animals as somehow evil and leading us towards sin. So how do we now try to reinstate a positive relationship with plants? How do we understand plants as something other than, passive and aesthetic? The Indigenous culture that I'm a part of, being a New Zealand Māori from the Te Oreohau Hapu and the Ngāpuhi tribes of the north of Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have a different understanding of how plants and humans interact together because we consider that we're actually part of the same bloodlines. So we don't have a separation between the animal world, the plant kingdom, and human civilization. Those three aspects are actually deeply entangled to the point where we have ancestors which are actually trees. There's a famous ancestor from the Te Oreohau Hapu in the Waipoua forest who is actually a tree called Tani Mahuta. He's a kauri tree, thousands of years old. So from this Indigenous thinking, my artwork proceeds with the idea that we can form these vibrant connections with plants because essentially we're composed of the same matter. We're both self-organizing systems with chemical and electrical forces, and by harnessing those forces we can create and co-compose together. Karen Barrage, the quantum physicist turned philosopher, in her book Meeting the Universe Halfway, has a concept of situated agency as a form of knowing, whereby every species on the planet and also, inanimate materials such as even geological materials have a sort of vibrant atomic ambient background that they reside within, and all of their capacities come out of this form of situated agency. Acknowledging plants as active producers of signals, as active creators and co-composers, rather than as passive aesthetic objects as they were traditionally framed by humanist discourses. Of course, this is building on some of the pioneering work by John Lifton and Richard Lowenberg from 1976. So all through the late 1970s, these artists and engineers were exploring ways that we could connect with plants using EEG sensing, various types of biosensor, and combining visual data from plants and humans in the same performative installation space. So building on this idea that plants can be live performers alongside humans using data networks creates a sense of co-composition and communion between the plant world and the human world. On top of that, we have the algorithmic world, and of course that's the ambient background to our digital lives on planet Earth. Connecting back up with this concept of the technological virtual, what we find is on the one hand we have nature sitting in our lap, as Donna Haraway might say, and on the other hand we have computational networks, we have data, we have ways that we sense along with computers, we have the Internet of Things, drawing us all into this big entangled web, where we're essentially codependent or interdependent on non-human forces. Humans are no longer at the center of this arrangement. We are no longer anthropos because we are co-creating every day with the non-human to the extent that we can no longer be placed at the center of a coherent universe, at the center of a logic that we control. Indeed, under the terms of the Anthropocene, planet Earth runs on our home browsers. Along with Donna Haraway, we can see that the Anthropocene is also the Capitalocene or the Plantationocene. If we follow with Anna Singh, we'll find the mushroom at the end of the world. Timothy Morton takes another step further when he says that we're already in the Bacteriocene. Okay, and if we think of the little bacteria that live upon our bodies, on our faces, our fingertips, and of course we're still within a COVID-19 pandemic, suggesting that actually our bodies are very effective hosts for all manner of bacteria and viruses, which we may not also welcome. Either way, all of these signs gesture toward the dysfunction of the term Anthropocene and the idea that this term might already be redundant. Perhaps it was a term that was never appropriate in the first place, since it was always vested in spurious notions of human control, of human centrism. So founded as thought on the premise that we must draw a line between humans and non-humans. Nature didn't have a brain, humans had the brain. We were the embodiment, as Descartes said, of cogito ergo sum. What we suggest in our paper is we might refigure the term Anthropocene with an S, so that it becomes a speculative space where, rather than thinking about the data tabulation, the visual imaging of the Earth from space, these scientific numbers that we're constantly given about climate change and human impact on the Earth, we might add in that S to Anthropocene and think of it as a speculative field, a field that encourages fabulation, not tabulation. In our artwork, we're thinking about ways we might reinscribe data with sensation and emotion, sound and touch, to create a contact zone of speculative fabulations, signaletic energies, and tactile sensing. Generative adversarial networks are well known in machine learning, where they sort, filter, sift through various types of data in order to create recognizable patterns for machines to learn from. So unsupervised learning, as it's often called, occurs within neural networks. Neural network is obviously just a metaphor for a computational brain. It actually has nothing to do with the human brain. We created an artwork which operated with plant signals, so recorded some of the signals that were generated out of living plants, and then we placed those through the adversarial network.
Thank you for the invitation to present at ISEA 2022. This presentation is about a recent collaborative work titled Environmental Critical Zones, Reading the Wrack Lines. It's an interdisciplinary environmental literacy and educational outreach project designed to engage the local community with innovative learning approaches focused on the reality and possibilities for change in our coastal environment. It resulted in 2 works, an audio-video projection on a nearby lighthouse, and soft sculpture composed of laser-cut felt phrases for a gallery exhibition. My name is Andrea Wollensak, Professor of Art and Associate Fellow at the Ammerman Center for Arts and Technology at Connecticut College. Brett Terry is a co-director in the Game Group, Modeling and Simulation at Sonalists, and our third collaborator is Bridget Baird, Emeritus Computer Science faculty at Connecticut College. This 10-minute talk will introduce our work background, themes in our artistic process as it relates to nature and worlds, description of works, and next steps. This project is framed by cross-cutting themes of diversity and inclusion and includes partnerships with local academic institutions and environmental specialists and the general public. Themes in our artistic practice draw on various sources as we work collaboratively with communities, poets, scientists, and composers, striving to decenter a singular perspective. We're interested in multiple layers of voice, gathered scientific data, and diverse points of view that define a visioning process that explores the larger issues of climate change and the bioloop of human impact on the global environment. Some of the goals and objectives for this work include increasing environmental and ocean literacy through creative writing workshops where participants are able to respond, reach, and propose change to local environmental issues. Presenting all community writing and voice, including high school and college students as well as the general public, through innovative multidisciplinary formats exploring digital poetics in a reflective and engaging experience. Reading the Wrack lines is the most recent artistic collaboration between the authors and is a part of a series of works focused on climate change and the environment. Previous collaborations on projects included Open Waters, which was shown at museums and presented at ISEA 2020. This work was inspired by a 500-year history of northern exploration, current geopolitics, and global circulation of microplastics. Another previous project was titled Ice Core Modulations, and that was exhibited at ISEA 2017 and included imagery and poetic fragments inspired, generated, and controlled via historical CO2 data taken from ice core samples. All of these collaborations have sought to create engaging works that address complex environmental issues through a plurality of artistic, poetic, and scientific perspectives. Reading the Wrack lines began as a local study during the global pandemic. Here is a line drawing showing the southeastern Connecticut coastline bordering Long Island Sound. The red dot is the University of Connecticut Avery Point campus, where we projected on the lighthouse. A wrack line or wrack zone is a coastal feature where organic material and other debris is deposited on the beach at high tide. The wrack can be made up of objects such as seaweed, crustaceans, or bits of plastic. As the edge between the natural input of marine resources and the land, the wrack zone is interrelated with the state of the sea. Shorelines locally and globally are affected by stronger and more frequent storms and the threat of sea level rise. Locally, Long Island Sound, we are seeing a decline of species, warming water temperatures, acidification, and changing ocean currents. In addition to working with students on different campuses for this project, we invited the general public to add their creative writing and audio recordings to the gallery website via a QR code. Here are a few lines of composed community poetry. Vulnerable to storm surge, sea level rise nearly 2 feet by 2050. Salt marshes cannot keep up with the increased rates of sea level rise. Rising seas, not enough ice to bring down the swelling. Responding to climate crisis, our duty. We built the project in processing software. It allowed us to conceptually engage with an unpredictable generative system, mirroring the unpredictability of weather and climate change impacts within our natural environment. This is an image of the Avery Point Lighthouse audio and video project, the evening of Earth Day 2021. And here's a close-up of the projection on the lighthouse. This is a short video of the projection early in the evening.
Fish heads spines and tails, candy wrappers, plastic straws. Waste won't nourish.
The waves crash loudly, disrupting quiet beaches. Humans crash louder.
20 inches by 2050. Long Island Sound rises.
The second part of the project resulted in a soft sculpture consisting of laser-cut felt as a rack line in the Cummings Galleries at Connecticut College. This was part of the Fire and Ice exhibition in the fall of 2021. Here's a close-up of the laser-cut felt with embedded audio.
Relishing the feeling of the sun on my face and the bottles and bags brushing across my ankles.
The next steps for this ongoing investigation is a year-long artist residency at the Anchorage Museum in Alaska. So last fall, I worked remotely with the museum's after-school Teen Climate Communicators program, where I held writing workshops with them, resulting in a podcast. We then organized public recording sessions for the local community in March of this year to share their local stories on local water. And these stories will be compiled into listening stations installed in and around Anchorage. And finally, I'm in the process of working with Alaska poets on interactive and generative video, where the poet's voice draws visual forms and text. And this work will be presented in November for evening projections on the museum facade. This next short video is a sample of the interactive work with poet Aaron Hollowell.
Ashling. Ocean dreams, tongue tipped with salt, lazy propellers, fish tail to nose, tail to nose, tail to nose, unemptiness. Beach dreams, clatter song of greywacky, bull kelp spiral, crow chatter, bulwark driftwood against the bluffs. Sky dreams, reflection, 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 slice of mountain, white wings, pinnacle thrust diminish.
And concluding, the collaboration intent of this work allows for interdisciplinary synergy between a creative team and the local community. The work amplifies participants' voices through physical and virtual public presentations. Funding for this work was provided by the Connecticut Sea Grant and from the Ammerman Center for Arts and Technology. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Erik Medina. I'm a PhD student in visual arts at the University of Campinas in Brazil. So I recognize that a virtual presentation is far less attractive than being at the venue itself, but due to some agenda restrictions, I couldn't make it to Barcelona this year. Maybe next time, who knows? Anyways, I reckon that this paper will help broaden the understanding of what I call the new craftsman, which is something that I'm really into. And the new craftsman is not like me and you, because it is something and not someone. And that is the particular reason that makes it so desirable in terms of academic investigation. Okay, so let's dive into it. Ever since the 60s, we have been noticing in the computer-based art field the solutions that arise from this collab between humans and non-humans. So from this association with a new partner to make art with instead of making art through, arises the need to reflect upon creativity in the artificial dimension, operations that are mediated in a certain sense by inorganic entities. And the isolated attitudes observed in this period, in the 60s, played a fundamental role in the foundation of machine art, and would result in a few years later in what I call the true landmark of numerical creation, that is the timeless cybernetic serendipity exhibition. And since then, a lot has changed. And so, since the 60s, the attitude of anthropomorphizing, as we say, machines and technifying human beings has revealed itself as an irreversible trend as virtualized entities become more and more intrinsic and also integrated into daily life, operating mutations that lead to somehow of cyborg-like embodiment. And in this sense, it seems timely for both artists and researchers to think and articulate contemporary strategies capable of promoting new forms of relationships with non-human entities. So the scenario that is based on the paradigm we call the new craftsman imposes itself as a central element to discuss the disembodied artistic creation that proliferates in our hyper-connected age, as we can say. I think we can say. But okay, am I saying that the AI is the artist? No, oh, kinda. What do I really want to say is that what the numerical entities are offering are potential means by which artists like you can express themselves. So, however, and at the same time, the more we perceive these technological evolutions, the more tenuous seems to be the line that delimits the frontiers of creations. It seems somehow blurred. And as we discover that AI is not a mere extension of the body and mind that allow the execution of tasks in the most tool-like sense, intelligent entities must be recognized as partners. And the urgency of repositioning the role of the human being in face of the rise of the new craftsman gains traction as we observe the growing number of artistic creations made in tandem with inorganic entities. We have seen 4 or 5 pictures so far in this presentation, and we will see more. Anyway, important questions appear from this recognition. What is the role of the human being in contemporary artistic development associated with machines? Questions like this are great. Was Harold Cohen the author of his paintings, or was Aaron the main producer? It is no secret that Cohen himself said he was surprised by the works of his digital partners. He said, clearly, the machine is being creative, the program is being creative, in that every time it makes a drawing, it makes a drawing that no one has ever seen before, including me. All right, that's cool. And it has been a long time since he said. In this sense, it would be, in my opinion, very convenient to say that the artist is the one who programs the algorithm, or even to grant both the artist and the programmers the authorship title. But both hypotheses seems fragile to me. Of course, the results of artistic experiments are humanly programmed, but the consequence, or what is claimed to be the work of art, is not done directly by a human being. According to Mark Zuckerberg, the algorithm and not the human is the artistic agent. And I go deeper in this proposition in the paper that I submitted. So, artists like Leonel Moura adopt a position that attributes to machine an important fraction of the creative process by considering valid an idea of autonomy in which the machine is capable of its own creativity, and that's bold. Okay, So this statement is in line with our preliminary attempts to address the questions presented so far, which suggests appreciating artificial intelligence as a form of organization of ideas different from those of human beings. The character of difference would allow a way to expand the relationships, I think, between humans and machines into a kind of amplified hybridization. And by understand AI not as a mimesis of thought, but as an aid in making connections, the creation with intelligence entities seems to make much more sense. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the point is not to anthropomorphize technology through this discourse and understand the AI as something organic, but to understand that certain inorganic creations can touch us, can help us, and can make us more human, illuminating our way, our own creativity by promoting latent tensions whose connections were at some point awakened by an agent outside our own biological thoughts. And the necessity of the recognition that, in a certain sense, creative manifestations developed with machines are not necessarily the exclusive creations of the artist, but the product of a self-precipitating structure is determinant for this formulation. It seems inconceivable to me not to recognize that creation with machines implies co-authorship, thus the new craftsman. It seems to be shallow to assume that artificial intelligence is a merely translation of human intelligence and that inorganic image, sound, text creations are hard-coded expressions of humankind. No, AI is different, is a different kind of intelligence. So my 2 cents is that if we shift the interest from the desire for a mimicry to a desire for a difference, we will begin to walk a prosperous path, especially in art. And I believe that from these man-machine collaborations, it would be more appropriate to hope for novelty and silliness. Revolutions in the artistic dimension cannot be conditioned to a set of operations that repeat the same logical forms of thought we are used to. It is necessary to leave the AI loose to create, to conceptualize, and to make sense of things and about the world in a way totally different than we will do. Certainly, a lot of work obtained in such ways will result in digital merde d'artiste, and this is the main symptom of its elegance. And finally, I think it's safe to recognize the proliferation of this new wave aesthetic, and it is perhaps also safe to conclude that AI applied to artistic creation is maybe the greatest revolution in the field, in the artistic field, since the invention of photography. The main difference, in my opinion, and challenge are that now we will probably have an army of Baudelaires along the way to face. And that's it. That's my contribution to ISEA 2022. And I hope to see you again very soon. Goodbye.